When writing the funding bid for the research project, Reinventing the Life event with local communities, I was mostly concerned with the theoretical challenge, the suspension of physical co-presence, which for a performance and theater scholar like me constitutes a live event and also its community building effects. Yeah, so I mean, this conference completely changed my approach to it. With the pandemic going into its second year, it was becoming likely that if in-person live events would happen again in the near future, then only under a regime of regulated and monitored co-presence. Therefore, my interest for engaging with artists and audience alike for exploring the impact of the pandemic and its restrictions on aesthetics. Yeah, and that encompassed the production processes as well as kind of the delivery and the experience. So how do the new ways artists found and find for working and collaborating during the pandemic affect the artworks? And there I'm interested more or less in all genres from poetry to performance. Do they tackle the issue of physical co-presence deliberately? And how do COVID-19 restrictions affect the intrinsic power of live events to generate a sense of community and enable shared experiences? And finally, how do audiences experience the change co-presence? Yeah, or even how do they approve or non-approve of kind of experimental art events? So, and that means that my research was not concerned with the socio-economic impact of COVID-19 on the creative industries, because I was not collecting data for supporting policy changes to make the creative industry more resilient or improve their chances for post-pandemic recovery. And adding to this, you know, we are located not really amidst the GNP relevant areas like Manchester or Sheffield, London, of course, or Cardiff, but in devolved Wales, which is on the margins of the creative industry in the UK. Yeah, but it is also not really rural either. Yeah, so for example, there are rather established and bigger art venues such as Pontio on the one side and Gallery in Carnarvon on the other side. Yeah, and there would be more to add to that list actually. The group of artists, however, I was keen to observe were those working outside these established venues. Some were non-trained and non-professional artists as well, and they are often not included in surveys or invisible in statistics when it comes to their economic situation, because they would not be included in that bit. Good. So the method for my research included organizing and observation of a combined arts festival. Metamorphosis, initiated and co-organized by Anna Powell, was held in Bangor and Anglesey in June 2021 over a full week with more than 30 contributing artists, covering, as you can read, music, dance, photography, workshops, etc., etc. Most events were outdoors, some indoors, only a few online. All events were limited to a maximum of 30 people, and all events were free of charge, and we did not offer food nor drinks. I think I'm listing this just to make another point that this paper is not really relevant for creative industries. In the months following the festival, further post-festival live arts events were conducted, enabling me to further explore the development of the artists and their aesthetics, as well as studying audiences. Apologies for my pronunciation of aesthetics. I am always struggling with this, and English speakers always make me aware that it should be done differently, but I am failing with that. Metamorphosis with 2F, because we are applying the Welsh alphabet, describes the process of transformation and therefore felt timely a title for the situation we found ourselves in. Furthermore, one of the events planned for the festival was a book launch by Hugh Prestatin-Jones, who did a translation of Franz Kafka's novella Metamorphosis into Welsh, and as you can see, for learners of Welsh during the first lockdown. And those who might know the story, one morning Gregor Samsa, Kafka's protagonist, finds himself transformed into an awful vermin and as a consequence locks himself in his room, where he later then is kept hidden in that same room by his family. But the title also records the narrative poem The Metamorphosis by the Roman poet Ovid, similar to Ovid's poem, which more or less assemblages varying themes and tones and kind of defies kind of a genre classification. Metamorphosis was a festival sui generis. So it was more or less a one-time festival, even though we kind of had a previous one called Safari, Surrealist Safari, in August 2020, but it's not really a festival that is meant to be repeated. Its theme remained connected to an anything goes umbrella, as Lindsay once put so beautifully. Consequently, it presented cross-genre collaborations and individual projects, which did not require to address the pandemic thematically. Nonetheless, due to the pandemic circumstances, the festival was too divert from all models of festival before, because the bodily co-presence at the festival was that of pandemic bodies, digitalized or spread out and face masked, and in most cases released into the outside. Drawing on Russian arts and literature scholar Michael Bachtin, who was already mentioned in that conference, festivals as prototypical carnivalesque situations can be perceived as ephemeral utopias, meaning bearing visionary experience of the other that is potentially as real as the status quo outside the festival. Ideas, experiences, senses, thoughts, images, words, movements, sounds, conversations, and more emerging in a festival ought to be regarded as political and socioeconomic manifestations of how, and now speaking of metamorphosis in particular, we can transform our being in this world as risk for better. So in the following, I will bombard you with numbers mostly. So I will share some findings from artists and audience questionnaires suggesting the popularity of small-scale events, and which helped to identify the unique characteristics well, I don't know how I wanted to end that sentence, but I will follow up that lead from the questionnaires and revisit one of the festival events, though I could visit more, but time is stopping me, to propose, not really to propose definite answers, but rather to propose follow-up research questions. And I'm very grateful that we already had the opportunity to experience similar aesthetic strategies with Lindsay's workshop yesterday, and Lindsay and Wanda's, and that we will hear about Crohn's bodies from Wanda later, because both have informed this paper. And I think we will be able to make a lot of connections here. So the artist questionnaire was circulated after the festival to about 34 participating artists, again, some of them professional and some of them not professional, and open until the end of October. A mix of multiple choice questions and kind of free text questions were asked, and yes and no questions, and lichen patterns as well. The response rate was low with 11 submitted questionnaires. And I think it is very likely that, that those participating artists who would normally not necessarily call themselves artists just didn't participate because they felt it's not, even though I invited them explicitly to do so. And I think that added to this general pandemic survey fatigue, yeah, that was already mentioned in, let me say, in COVID-19 research papers. And from the 11 responses, 10 were in English and 1 was in Welsh. But they, you know, I will put them together. I won't further differentiate between them. And I'm bombarding you now with numbers. Apologies for that. It is also a bit an experiment, and maybe we can talk about this bombardment with numbers and as well, and you could tell me whether it works. Because for me, it's the first time really working with surveys and numbers, and I don't know whether they help me to make a point or whether they don't. So for 8, the Metamorphosis Festival was the first time they presented their work since the first lockdown, with 6 not being able to continue art projects they started before the pandemic. And that suggests that the festival acted as a showcase platform for testing out ideas and practices. This is further supported by the fact that all artists confirmed that their participation in the Metamorphosis Festival expanded their practice into new art forms. 3 engaged with new materials and 6 collaborated with new people. The festival therefore triggered not only creative trajectory, but also new collaborations. As 8 artists felt that the event was more experimental than usual, and 7 stated that they did take more risk than usual, the platform that Metamorphosis seems, that was Metamorphosis, seems less that of an arrival, but that of a stop on a longer journey. In a later interview, one artist phrased that as follows, I quote, "The festival was a starting point, not the end." What is striking is the fact that 9 artists disagreed that during their live event, the COVID-19 protocols made them feel disconnected to the audience. And 5 of the 8 agreed, and 5 of these 9 agreed, and 3 even strongly agreed that during their live event, they felt to be part of a community with the audience, yeah, and if applicable, with co-performers. These numbers suggest that the more experimental art formats bridged the pandemic-related physical distancing. Going back to the 7 artists who felt that they took more risk in their art making also suggests that the pandemic triggered a creative trajectory to bridge these, the social distancing. The creative impact of the pandemic and the platform character of the festival are also implied when 6 artists strongly agreed and 4 agreed that it was a pandemic circumstances their event was exposed to that made them see new aspects of their work. One predominant aspect of looking at their art practice differently was actually audience engagement, yeah, with 8 artists strongly and 2 artists agreeing on the benefits for audience engagement by the small scale of the Metamorphosis Festival. Yeah. And free text put questions about what artists liked most about the small scale of the events. They particularly highlighted the possibility for generating an ephemeral community, enabling intimate experience for both artists and audiences, as well as meaningful interaction among all, with some, yeah, among all. Yeah, and some even suggested that because of the small scale, these distinctions of artists and audience were blurred. Okay, the audience questionnaire. So the audience questionnaire shows interesting parallels. Yeah, 46 questionnaires were submitted, 9 in Welsh and 37 in English. Again, I'm not going to differentiate language-wise here further. When asked to comment on how they felt during the event in open text questions, the questionnaire participants vary in their answers, most often caused by the different events they went to. But almost all answers included a comment that they felt engaged and able to relate to others and performers, to others or the participants. When asked about differences to events they visited prior to the pandemic, most participants mentioned the social distancing, the small number in audience. Others elaborated more on the effects of spread out audiences and visible health and safety measures. The answers mention that the event felt calm and kind, allowing more space and time to explore the experience. For those events outdoors, only little differences was perceived. However, in each questionnaire, responses demonstrate that the audience noticed a shift to more experimental art formats. Good news when asked whether they would still attend small-scale events of that kind they saw at the Metamorphosis Festival. Once other large-scale venues reopen, everyone confirmed with yes, and only one kind of defined via the option if they were free of charge. Concluding, it is to say that small-scale events generate intimacy and intensity, intersubjectivity and inclusivity, which are difficult to generate in large-scale events. This way, small-scale events are likely to generate long-term commitments as they form personal relationships. They can create a series of different events and thus enable artists to share audiences rather than them to compete for audiences. Of course, here a platform like the festival demonstrates the sharing idea in a nutshell, doesn't it? One of the predominant themes and common ground in both questionnaires, artists and audiences, was the feeling that one of the outstanding qualities of the festival is to be found in the different grade of engagement the small audience allows. The intimate encounters with artists and audiences were experienced as enriching and are felt worth to be sustained for the future on both sides, artists and audiences. The questionnaire, however, the questionnaires were not designed to allow to identify how the artistic formats of the individual events interrelated with the intimate experience and the power to bridge the social distancing. So, and this is why now at the remaining time, I tick the box with the numbers and I now really look a bit closer to onto one artistic format, and that is the site-specific movement performance metamorphosis movement. And also, can you tell me when I'm running out of time? Yeah, because I don't want to use my privilege to be the host of the conference. Okay, so metamorphosis movement was an exploration of process around feeling. That's a quote from Samina Ali, who led that experiment. Samina Artist is a psychotherapist and becoming artist. For her, the Metamorphosis Festival turned out to be a platform to expand her practice she had been so far exercising on her own only. In preparation of the festival, Samina worked with a group of about 8 people, most of them lay performers. There were some with training in dance or experience in dance. She introduced them into the movement technique and developed a performance of that practice for the festival. Informed by psychotherapy's knowledge of the importance of intimacy and the reflective potential of movement, Samina guided the group for entering into an intimate space with nature at 4 different sites in North Wales. All meetings started with a meditation that localized and grounded bodies and minds using senses, body and soul for entering the intimate space, an interior beyond subjectivity. So it's odd for me to use the term soul in an academic context, but I will later refer to Kristeva, and she uses that as well to really describe this gray area, you know, of I don't know, a simultaneous, a parallel or assemblage of senses and body, and also to counter the Freudian concept of the psyche. With each meeting, participants reported to find access to this intimate interior easier. Yeah, it was set out as a prerequisite. So this finding this intimate interior in oneself, as Samina described it, was a prerequisite for the kinesthetic communication with a non-human other. It is important to acknowledge that Samina's practice does not reduce nature as a resource for inspiration and relaxation, as often happens in discourses on sustainability, particularly in context of the pandemic. But quite contrary, the kinesthetic practice realized a shifting away from this subject-object relation between humans and nature, yeah, that we all know is predominant in the Anthropocene, and more towards an object-oriented intimacy. Though not directly grounded in Julia Kristeva's psychoanalytic post-structuralist theories, particularly her research on intimacy, abjection, and revolt in sense and nonsense, the innovation of metamorphosis movement, I want to suggest, can be grasped when reading its practice through Kristeva. So, and the quiet modesty of metamorphosis movement might too easily hide the fact that the kinesthetic practice questions hegemonies of human individuality, and that it breaks with long accepted distinctions between subject and object, inside and outside, human and non-human. All these distinctions that are intrinsic for the socialization into bodies that can be colonized, economized, exploited, etc. So this is why I really would say this is a radical practice. Responses in interviews with the group and with audience responses after the performance at the festival also show that the kinesthetic practice was indeed communicative, yeah, not only within the intimate zone of artists and the more than human, but also within the expanded community with the audience. Yeah, so the bodies of the artists were kind of mediators as well. Yeah. And I mean, this is something maybe to discuss in more detail afterwards, but also it was not only an individual communication between, one of the participants and the more than human, but there was the kind of human communication, kind of a collective communication implied or practiced as well via the movement. Oh God, that's a long sentence. That said, the fact that the intimate kinesthetic experience crossed boundaries and common sense of how to behave within and towards nature and non-nature becomes visible when artists expressed how challenging it was for them to leave their comfort zones, or when audience members remember that they withdrew from joining in, even though Samina invited everyone to do that before the start of the performance. And they withdrew from joining in, though they were utterly attracted to do so. Yeah. In several of the preparing meetings, artists mentioned the eroticism of the practice, which further relates Metamorphosis movement to Julia Kristeva, and because she emphasizes on the erotic dimension of revolt. So erotic pleasure and jouissance are crucial for all subjectivity, and for Kristeva, it is those exact practices which awaken kind of primordial drives that mobilize the motivation to break with accepted truths and behaviors, which also links back to Michael Bachtin's acknowledgement of the carnivalesque as utopian. Yeah, and I mean, we know that Bachtin and Kristeva kind of get together. The quiet erotic trajectory of Metamorphosis movement might anticipate a new and particularly more than human aesthetic. And this is what really, I don't know, this is what I'm interested in. This is for me, so yes, yeah, I want to look more into that. It is, however, an artistic format which breaks with common givens of festivals pre-pandemic. Yeah, for example, the distinction between audience and artists or performers, or the metric regime in favor of large-scale events. It requires rethinking festival procedures and festival sites as well. So here further research is kind of required, how kinesthetic explorations into the more than human affects concepts of site specificity or placemaking as well. Here, however, recollecting my initial references to Michael Bachtin and Kristeva once more, lies the transformative power of Metamorphosis movement when boundaries are transgressed and new agencies emerge. Yes, for example, that of the more than human, or even kind of the agency of the site as well. A similar radical shift disarrays concepts of meaning-making processes through creative practices. The intimate encounters with the more than human by Metamorphosis movement destabilizes seemingly fixed categories of meaning and rooted within kind of us as Western subjects, yeah, kind of, and of course, reinforcing Enlightenment and capitalism. And of course, these meaning-making processes that often happen in non-radical artistic practices are often only reaffirming kind of the economized or are economized by neoliberal capitalism nowadays. Yeah. So, for example, if you've got these discourses on placemaking, they are mostly led nowadays by event sciences or by by economic sciences. Yeah, so it's all about placemaking is only to make people go for coffee, something like that. Sorry. As such, metamorphosis movement qualifies and disqualifies for a research project aiming for proposing how pandemic-related changes might be harnessed to improve future resilience in the creative sector, as those phrasings buttress the very economization that metamorphosis movement undermines, in my opinion. That said, in the face of the global climate crisis, metamorphosis movement is clearly seminal for sustaining and justifying the creative paradigmatic shift to local small-scale life events. Such kind, intimate aesthetics also bear the potential to change people's understanding and appreciation of new forms of live arts events. And I'm again grateful and hopeful that we will have to get a chance to get familiar or even more unfamiliar with yet another new form of live arts event that Chromecast explored in the context of the festival by Wanda Siborska. And I'm closing with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. There's lots of things in there. I'm sure there's lots of questions, and I could also see by the documentation there were a few people in the conference that were involved in some of these events. So maybe I'll open it up and see if anyone's got anything they want to add, develop, contribute. Or I can start if you like, if it's easier, because I did write a few things down. There were a few things that I thought were really interesting. You mentioned that I think through the questionnaires for the artists that collaboration was born out of these small scale events, the intimacy of these small scale events. And I thought that was quite an interesting idea in terms of metamorphosis itself, because it's the whole premise in a way of collaboration is this shift from individual subjectivity to intersubjectivity. So that kind of constant shift. And the thing that kept coming back to me, and I thought about it yesterday when you were talking about becoming the nut. And I think I've kind of have this almost this voice of Gilles Deleuze in my mind the whole time, with all of his becoming animal and his theories of becoming, because again that's the whole idea of metamorphosis is embedded in this idea of a shift from a stable subject. And I know that your kind of background in kind of researching the Fluxus movement is also kind of obviously important in this idea of shift from product to process. So I think I mean maybe just to kind of start the discussion with some of those ideas.
Yes, I mean, my understanding of art is maybe a bit irrelevant, so to speak, but this away from product towards process is something that all involved artists were repeating again and again. So, which was good to hear, because it's easier.
Yeah, and I suppose in a way it's part of the live event, isn't it? The temporality of that event. It can never be something fixed and containable, because we have all of these unknown elements. We have audience, we have space, we have these conditions. Yeah, some Vanda's put a few things in the chat. Deleuze, Bradotti, Haraway, yeah, lots of kind of references about this. Because as you were speaking, I was thinking, you were talking about the object-orientated intimacy, but talking about the human and the natural world. But I was thinking actually really interesting if you went back through your paper, to actually apply that object-orientated intimacy to the human and the digital, because I think a lot of the things you were saying were equally as relevant and resonated for me.
Thank you.
Do we have any other comments? I think Vonda's also kind of made a link between Christeva and Chromecast, which she's going to talk about later, which, yeah, I was kind of thinking about Christeva when I read Vonda's abstract, you know, particularly maybe the abject as well as part of that discourse.
I think Nick.
I put my gold hand. I was curious, Sarah, especially with the images of the metamorphosis in the forest, since you mentioned placemaking is often tied to sort of economic incentive or business improvement districts, or in fact ways just to concentrate capital in urban centers. If the site or the selection of what looks like a forest is critical to understanding this project, because it's so distant either from contemporary references, whether it be Starbucks or retail opportunities.
Thank you so much for mentioning this, because it is for me an ethical question to talk about these things, and also particularly in, I know, a research project that might, you know, be so, because I'm reproducing what the artists are doing and putting it in another context where it might hopefully and not hopefully gain momentum as well, because I've realized that it's so difficult to put it in words. What you're describing with Starbucks, they have these experience industry ideas where you know, they built this factory in Seattle where you don't only go there to drink a coffee, but you can have a tour to experience how that coffee is made.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And of course, this is very process-like as well, and the process becomes the product as well, particularly as an experience,
right.
A sensual experience as well. That is, of course, super designed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right.
Of course, you can claim it's still subjective. You know, some might smell the peaches in that coffee bean roast, and some might smell it as cherry or something. But of course, it's still super designed,
right.
And it's very limited as well. But that was what lots of the events that were developed for the festival, or actually on the festival developed. You know, can be economized somehow and, you know, made into this experience industry. So for me, it is it's a very thin line. Yeah, I don't know. Does it make sense?
Yeah. I think it's not even a line. I think it's
so I don't have the words yet. I don't have.
It's often an experience to insinuate sort of brand loyalty. You know, that you feel that you're part of it, and therefore you're, you know, it's like becomes part of your DNA, or it's, you know, it's an expected allegiance because you've had this experience.
Yeah. I don't know, can I ask a question? I mean, because Wanda and Steph, I think did you watch the Metamorphosis movement? Were you there on the festival? And Lindsay, you participated. Does some of your experience echo in what I said, or would you say?
No, I'm rather wishing that I had stayed. I was at the poetry, Zoe's, got late to Zoe's poetry performance, but I'd seen a similar one. But I missed Semina's just because by the end of that day I was too tired to stay for it, and I've sort of regretted not staying since, really. No, I don't know about Steph. But...
No, sorry, I didn't attend it, Sarah, so I can't really comment further on the actual experience of the event, of that particular event with Semina.
one of the unfortunate things about being in a festival like that is that you don't always have time or then the remaining energy to go to many of the other things. And those events I did get to were great, but that was one I missed.
I took part in it, and it was possibly the most challenging thing I ever had to do. I mean, maybe the bit you were saying about the eroticism thing, Sarah, I mean, maybe because there were so many different things acting on you. One was like, can you get in touch and then translate physically with, you know, with what's going on around you? Like, that's a major challenge for me anyway. Then to do it in front of other people. And then there was also music was added. And not knowing, because many people would just move beautifully, you know, some people move beautifully. I just really don't do that. So it's like so many challenges. And then so basically what you had to do is be extremely in the moment and explicit about how you're feeling. And of course, one of the things you're feeling, like in some of the places we started off with these amazing mossy humps, and you find yourself like, I mean, you do have these erotic moments, but like in public, and your job is to show it. I mean, you know, anyway, I found the whole thing really challenging and wonderful. You know, there was no script at all. We just did it, and yeah. I find it really hard to talk about it because it was such a physical experience. It's actually really hard to talk about it. But yeah, I think it's interesting, the intimate aesthetics of honest engagement and connection is so countercultural that it's hard to even put it into words that are reasonable on a Zoom call, I think.
I think you started to answer Ellie's question, which you put in the chat, which was, what, if any, metamorphosis did the participants and artists experience, and what did it look like? So yeah, I think perhaps, Lindsay, you were struggling with kind of social norms and social propriety and how we're used to behaving. I think it's being away from those commercial spaces that Nick was talking about is quite interesting, isn't it? Because we do behave differently in different spaces, and perhaps being in that very kind of rural, tactile environment engendered some of those conditions that you're talking about and some of those responses.
And just to add to that, so also this is quite academic. I'm feeling slightly out of my depth now academically in the discussion. But in one of the things Samina has done with Utopia's Bach is she's holding these heart space discussions where no one speaks and they're really moved to speak. And as part of Utopia's Bach, we do this sort of documentation and feedback of what have we learned in that experiment that we're doing. And so what she did is she did a movement response to it. So she's moving in the landscape to see what her body says she's found with that experience. And only after that talked about it. So like if I was asked to give feedback physically first, that might be an easier way to connect back into that to that experience, because maybe there doesn't need to be, no, there's not really a disconnect. It's like, where do you start, isn't it? Like, can you talk with your intellect about something your body led with any integrity or not? And this video that Lisa's made of Samina doing it moved me to tears. That doesn't often happen. I don't know what it is. It's like, it's so honest and out there. It's sort of genuinely, because you're so vulnerable in that situation, maybe, I don't know.
I think I wanted to ask more about the meditation, and because you mentioned senses and body and soul. I'm minded of somatic movement, where our bodies are very in tune with movement and the space in which they're moving without actually being consciously aware of it. So I just wondered how that meditation led into the movement.
Could you just repeat that word? The what movement did you say? I didn't catch it.
Somatic practice. So sort of the soma, of the internal, and all its different components of the body. But
yeah, thank you.
I just wondered how that meditation led you into the movement. That was my question.
Is it more for Lindsay, or
you did it too, Sarah?
Yeah, so for me, maybe it was Samina emphasized or tried to use words and describe it as finding our wild version. And with wild doesn't necessarily mean loud and partying, but kind of to unlearn what our day job and the day already did to us. And with White, I think she tried to to really hear where our body is in that situation, where it was and where it is now. So it was a very typical kind of focusing meditation for me. Yeah. And also this self-awareness, not losing self-awareness, but finding a new self-awareness. So not of that where to think, not to think of someone observing you, or But Lindsay, what did you?
Yes. Well, we did. Yeah, there was the bit Samina did, which did help you sort of, come in and focus in your body in quite a powerful way. And then we did this thing, which also I usually hate. You go, it's another go round circle thing. I remember once being part of this singing group, and the warm-up was each person had to make a sound and jump like an animal or something. It's like my idea of absolute hell. So we did a circle. We had to do a particular movement to sort of part of warm-up or whatever. And at first I found it really traumatic, but actually it does really work, and you relax and think, why am I trying to be anything at all? Then it really flowed. So we went from the meditation into sort of each of us doing a different shape or action that we all copied as part of the warm-up. And then that was our quick way into getting into that zone. So it's sort of almost like a ritual to begin with. Meditation, follow each other, and then you just gradually sort of dispersed off. And you could see people, were people eyeing up a place to go to that they wanted, or did it just emerge? There was always this sort of slight territorial, was there? I really wanted to be on the edge, because that site is it's not a pristine forest. It's there's ruins in it, and an old hydro scheme or an outlet pipe and a cliff to the Menai Straits. So, I really wanted to be there. So I definitely kept my eye out. If anyone was moving that way, I might slightly claim territory there. So yeah, there's always so much going on.
But that a bit kind of shows again. This is why I think it's a radical practice, because you question yourself and what you've learned, and once you are able to question this and then see the benefits of questioning this, you will apply it to other circumstances as well. And this is also what I think we will see when Wanda talks about Chromecast in a minute. Or later. I think Nick is up first. And sorry, there was something else I wanted to say. It will come back to me at a later point.